Let us start with the uncomfortable reality that most people already feel but rarely hear stated clearly. In many parts of the United States today, especially anywhere within commuting distance of a major city, a $500,000 home is no longer considered expensive. It is considered normal. It is not a mansion. It is not a luxury property. In most cases, it is a modest house with average square footage, older finishes, and very little land. And yet, this price point is now casually described as a starter home. That shift is the core problem. When you scroll through real estate listings late at night and see price after price clustered around $500,000, it starts to feel like this is simply how things are. The market presents it as reasonable. Agents describe these homes as affordable for the area. Lenders say you are approved. Social media makes it look routine. Over time, something dangerous happens. People stop questioning whether the numbers actually make sense. Historically, a home at this price level would have been associated with a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. It would have implied financial stability, room in the budget, and long-term security. Today, it is treated as the minimum entry ticket just to participate in homeownership in many markets. That normalization is deeply misleading because it disconnects home prices from the income reality of most households. The frustration buyers feel is not emotional weakness or poor planning. It is a rational response to irrational pricing. Wages have not risen at the same pace as housing costs. When people feel confused, exhausted, or discouraged while looking at listings, that reaction is data. It is the brain recognizing that something is off. This is not about mindset. It is not about wanting it badly enough. It is about math. When prices that once represented financial comfort become the baseline expectation, the system becomes distorted. Buyers are pushed to stretch, compromise, and accept levels of risk that would have been considered unreasonable in the past. And because everyone around them appears to be doing the same thing, it starts to feel normal. But normal does not mean sustainable. By starting here, by calling out the redefinition of what a normal home costs, we set the foundation for everything that follows. The housing market has not just gotten expensive. It has crossed into a space where affordability for the majority of people no longer exists, not by accident, but by design. When you move past the feeling that something is wrong and actually look at the numbers, the problem becomes impossible to ignore. In the United States today, the median household income is around $84,000 a year. At the same time, in many housing markets, the price of a completely ordinary home sits close to $500,000. That means the typical house now costs about 6 times what the typical household earns in a year. That ratio alone should make anyone pause. Historically, housing markets that were considered healthy did not operate this way. For decades, home prices usually hovered around 2.5 to 3 times annual household income. That balance mattered because it allowed families to own a home while still having room to save money, handle emergencies, and plan for the future without constant financial pressure. When that ratio stretches to 6 times income, it is not a minor shift. It is a structural break. Yet despite this, buyers are constantly told that everything is fine. Banks approve the loans, real estate agents say the prices are justified, and buyers see other people purchasing similar homes and assume the math must somehow work. The problem is that this reasoning confuses approval with affordability. Those two things are not the same. When a bank approves a mortgage, it is not asking whether your life will feel stable or comfortable for the next 30 years. It is asking whether, under a specific set of assumptions, you can make the required payments right now. That assessment does not account for long-term stress, rising costs, job changes, medical expenses, or the emotional toll of living with no financial margin. A household can qualify for a mortgage and still be one unexpected expense away from trouble. This is why affordability needs to be viewed as a quality of life question, not a lending checklist. A home is affordable only if it allows you to cover your housing costs while still saving money, investing for retirement, maintaining the property, and handling surprises without panic. When the median household cannot do that with the median home price, The issue is not poor budgeting or lack of discipline. The issue is a housing market that has drifted far away from income reality while continuing to present itself as normal. The math is not complicated, and it is not new. It is simply being ignored. And that disconnect is what traps so many people into believing that struggling is just part of the deal. Continuing from that broken income to price relationship, the conversation inevitably turns to the down payment, because this is where many people are told they simply need to try harder. For decades, the standard advice has been to put 20% down when buying a home. On a $500,000 house, that means arriving at the closing table with $100,000 in cash. For most-time households, that single requirement quietly ends the conversations before it even begins. To understand why, you have to compare that expectation to reality. The typical American household does not have anything close to $100,000 sitting in savings. In fact, for many families, total savings are measured in a few $1,000s, not six figures. This is not because people are careless or irresponsible. It is because day-to-day living costs consume most of their income long before saving at that level becomes possible. Even if you imagine a household earning around the median income and saving aggressively, the math still falls apart. Setting aside 10% of gross income every year is far above what most people can realistically manage. Yet even at that pace, it would take more than 10 years to save enough for a traditional down payment. And that calculation assumes home prices remain flat for an entire decade, which historically has not been the case. As prices continue to rise, the finish line keeps moving further away. This is why the down payment issue is not a motivation problem. It is not about discipline, mindset, or sacrificing small luxuries. It is a capacity problem. The expectation itself is misaligned with income levels. Treating six-figure savings as a basic requirement ignores the financial reality most households live in. Because of this, buyers are pushed towards smaller down payments. They are told this is a solution, a workaround that keeps homeownership within reach. In practice, it simply shifts the problem rather than solving it. Lower down payments increase monthly costs, raise long-term risk, and reduce financial flexibility. Instead of creating affordability, they introduce new pressures that compound over time. What gets lost in this discussion is that the down payment rule was designed for a very different housing market. Applying it to today's prices without adjusting for income reality creates a barrier that most people cannot clear, no matter how responsible they are. And when a system requires unrealistic assumptions just to get started, it is a sign that the problem runs far deeper than individual effort. Once buyers accept that saving a full 20% down is out of reach, they are usually presented with what sounds like a reasonable compromise. Instead of putting down $100,000, they are told they can put down 5 or 10% and still buy the house. On the surface, this feels like a solution. In reality, it introduces one of the most misunderstood costs in homeownership. This is where private mortgage insurance enters the picture. PMI is triggered when a buyer puts down less than 20%, and it exists for one reason only. It protects the lender. It does not protect the homeowner. It does not build equity faster, and it does not improve financial security in any meaningful way. It is an added monthly charge designed to reduce the bank's risk, not yours. For many buyers, PMI adds hundreds of dollars to their monthly payment. Depending on the loan and credit profile, that amount can easily fall between $200 and $400 every single month. That money does not go toward the home itself. It does not lower the loan balance. It simply disappears as an ongoing fee for not having enough cash up front. This is why PMI functions less like insurance and more like a penalty. Buyers are effectively charged extra because they lack wealth, often generational wealth, that would have allowed them to avoid the fee entirely. Two households can buy identical homes at the same price, but the one with more savings pays less every month. The system rewards existing wealth and punishes its absence. What makes this especially damaging is that PMI compounds an already stretched budget. Buyers who use low down payments are often doing so because they are at the edge of affordability to begin with. Adding another recurring cost increases financial strain from the very first payment. Instead of easing access to homeownership, it tightens the margin even further. Over time, this additional cost increases stress and reduces flexibility. It leaves less room for savings, repairs, and unexpected expenses. And because PMI is tied to the loan balance, many buyers remain locked into it for years, paying thousands of dollars for a risk they themselves are absorbing. This is the uncomfortable truth that rarely gets emphasized. Lower down payments do not make homes more affordable in the long run. They make them more expensive. They shift costs from the beginning of the process into the monthly payment, where they quietly erode financial stability. When a system presents higher long-term costs as a solution to affordability, it reveals its priorities. PMI does not exist to help buyers live better lives. It exists to keep transactions moving, even when the underlying numbers no longer support sustainable ownership. Once PMI is added to the picture, it becomes clear that the mortgage payment alone is only a small part of the real cost of owning a home. This is where many buyers are caught off guard because the number they fixate on is the monthly principal and interest. That number feels concrete, predictable, and manageable. Unfortunately, it is incomplete. For a $500,000 home, the mortgage payment by itself might land somewhere in the high $2,000 range. On paper, that figure can look doable, especially when stretched across two incomes. But ownership does not stop at the mortgage. The moment you add the other required costs, the picture changes dramatically. Property taxes are one of the first additions, and they are not optional. Depending on location, they can add hundreds of dollars every month, and they tend to rise over time. Homeowners insurance is another required expense, and in many regions, those premiums have been increasing as risks related to weather and natural disasters grow. These are costs you must pay to keep the home, regardless of whether your income changes. Then there is maintenance, the expense most often ignored in early calculations. Homes wear down, systems fail, roofs, plumbing, appliances, and heating systems all have limited lifespans. A common rule of thumb is to budget about 1% of the home's value per year for maintenance. On a home at this price level, that works out to several $100s a month. This is not a luxury buffer. It is the cost of keeping the house functional. When you combine the mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and PMI, the total monthly cost often climbs well beyond what buyers initially expect. What looked manageable at first can quickly approach a level that dominates the household budget. And this estimate still assumes that nothing major breaks and that there are no additional fees. The deeper issue is that housing costs are not fixed. They are variable, unpredictable, and often rise over time. Taxes increase, insurance premiums adjust, and maintenance expenses arrive without warning. Unlike rent, which has a clear monthly limit, ownership exposes households to a wide range of financial shocks. This is why focusing only on the mortgage payment is so misleading. It creates a false sense of affordability. The real cost of a home is layered, and each layer adds pressure. When those layers stack up, a purchase that seemed reasonable on paper can become a constant source of financial stress in real life. Once the full monthly cost of ownership is clear, the next logical question is simple. What level of income actually makes this affordable without constant stress? This is where many assumptions begin to fall apart, because the income required is far higher than most people expect. Financial guidelines have long suggested that housing costs should take up no more than about 28% of gross household income. This rule exists for a reason. It leaves room for savings, emergencies, transportation, healthcare, and long-term planning. When you apply that guideline to the real monthly cost of a $500,000 home, the income requirement rises quickly. To stay within that range, a household would need to earn close to $187,000 per year. Even if you use far more lenient standards, the numbers remain high. Banks are often willing to approve loans as long as total debt stays under roughly 43% of income. This threshold is not designed for comfort. It is designed to reduce default risk in the short term. Even under this more aggressive assumption, a household would still need to earn around $150,000 annually to support the full cost of ownership. That level of income places a household well above the national median. Only a relatively small share of households earn anywhere near this amount. This means that when $500,000 homes are treated as normal, the market is effectively demanding upper-tier incomes from average buyers. That is not affordability. It is risk being presented as normal behavior. This is why seeing many people buy at these price points does not prove that the system works. It proves that stretching has become standard practice. Buyers are exceeding conservative financial thresholds, not because it is safe, but because there is no other way to participate. Over time, this normalization of risk creates widespread financial fragility. When households must devote such a large share of their income to housing, flexibility disappears. Saving becomes difficult. Unexpected expenses become stressful. Any disruption in income carries outsized consequences. This is not how a stable financial foundation is built. The important takeaway here is not that people are making foolish choices. It is that the market is demanding unrealistic sacrifices. The math behind affordability is straightforward. When the income required to live comfortably in an average home is out of reach for most households, the issue is not personal failure. It is a housing market that has drifted far away from income reality while continuing to insist that everything is normal. To make these numbers feel real instead of abstract, it helps to look at what happens to a household that is doing everything right on paper. Imagine a family earning $160,000 a year. That income places them well above the national median. By most standards, they are successful, educated, and stable. This is exactly the kind of household people assume should have no trouble affording a home. But income on paper is not the same as money available to live on. Once taxes are taken out, along with payroll deductions, health insurance premiums, and modest retirement contributions, their take-home pay drops significantly. What sounded like a very high salary quickly becomes a much smaller monthly number that has to cover everything in their lives. Now, place that household into a $500,000 home with the full cost of ownership already discussed. Mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and PMI together consume a large portion of their monthly income. In many cases, it approaches or even exceeds 40% of what they actually take home. That is before a single dollar is spent on food, transportation, or daily living. From there, the pressure starts to show up in ordinary places. 2 vehicles may be necessary for commuting, which means car payments, insurance, fuel, and maintenance. Student loans often remain, even at higher income levels. Utilities rise with a larger home. Groceries, basic healthcare costs, and everyday expenses continue regardless of income. What remains at the end of the month is far less than people expect. This is where financial stress becomes part of daily life. Savings goals are postponed because there is never quite enough left over. Home repairs are delayed unless they become urgent. Vacations are scaled back or skipped entirely. Every unexpected expense requires a mental calculation about what has to be sacrificed to make room for it. The most damaging part is not any single bill. It is the constant tension, living with the knowledge that one job disruption, one medical issue, or one major repair could unravel everything creates anxiety that does not show up in spreadsheets. It affects decisions, relationships, and long-term planning. These households are not reckless. They are not living beyond their means in obvious ways. They are doing exactly what the market tells them is normal. And yet, the system demands that they accept chronic financial pressure as the price of ownership. This example matters because it exposes the myth that high income automatically equals affordability. Even households earning well above average can find themselves stretched thin when prices are disconnected from income reality. The struggle is not a personal failure. It is the predictable outcome of a market that treats unsustainable sacrifice as the cost of entry into normal homeownership. As this example shows, what many people casually call being house poor is not a short phase or a harmless adjustment period. It is long-term financial damage that quietly reshapes how people live. Yet culturally, this condition has been normalized and even romanticized. Struggling to afford a home is often framed as a rite of passage, something responsible adults simply endure on the way to eventual comfort. In reality, being house poor removes the very things that make financial stability possible. When nearly every dollar is committed to housing, flexibility disappears. There is no buffer. A broken appliance, a medical bill, or a temporary drop in income stops being an inconvenience and becomes a crisis. Decisions are no longer made based on what is best, but on what is immediately necessary to keep the mortgage paid. Over time, this pressure changes behavior. Emergency repairs are placed on credit cards, not because people are careless, but because there is no cash available. Savings that were meant to grow slowly are drained just to keep things functioning. Retirement contributions are reduced or paused. Long-term goals are pushed further into the future with each unexpected expense. One of the least discussed consequences of being house poor is the loss of mobility. When a household is stretched to its limit, changing jobs becomes risky. Moving to a new city, taking time off, or switching careers can feel impossible when every payment depends on steady income. People stay in jobs they dislike, not because they want to, but because they cannot afford instability. The house that was supposed to provide security becomes a source of constraint. This is where the idea of homeownership as automatic wealth building begins to break down. Equity only matters if you can hold the asset without sacrificing your financial health. When all available resources are used to service debt, wealth does not grow in any meaningful way. Stress replaces progress, and ownership becomes maintenance of a fragile balance rather than a path forward. The problem is not that people want to own homes. The problem is what happens when affordability is ignored and sacrifice is treated as normal. A home should support a life, not dominate it. When ownership requires constant stress and financial trade-offs, it stops being an achievement and starts functioning like a liability. Calling this experience normal does not make it healthy. Being house poor is not proof of responsibility or maturity. It is a warning sign that the numbers never worked in the first place, and that the cost of ignoring affordability shows up slowly, in the form of lost options, chronic stress, and delayed financial freedom.